We begin this new year, we're going to start a new sermon series. It's entitled Simple Church. But this morning, I'm going to try to look at, I'm going to mainly focus on the church, but we're also going to, everything that I'm going to say, I think easily applies to a broader kind of scope of our entire lives. As we begin a new year, a lot of people make resolutions, although I feel like it's gotten more popular to not make resolutions, kind of the non-resolution resolution. But still, at the beginning of the year, people take this kind of as a time, as a break, to say, I'm going to do something different, and I looked it up. People say that they want to exercise more, they want to lose weight, they want to get organized, they want to learn a new skill and hobby. Those are the top 4 resolutions people are making in the new year. Exercise more, lose weight, get organized, and learn a new skill and hobby. And so if any of those are yours, or whatever your New Year's resolution might be, or if there's anything new that you're hoping to accomplish this year, or if there are any goals that you have set in your life, whether you're doing it just as a normal part of life. I used to start New Year's resolutions on Thanksgiving. I thought that was the best time to do it. In my mind, just how I work, maybe it was like I'm going to start right now in November. I'm going to get ahead of the game. I'm going to go start working out more at the gym before January 1st when it gets really busy. I'm going to start reading books in November instead of January. Why wait if you already have your mind kind of set on it? Was sort of the mentality that I had. So I want you to know that everything that we do, everything that we talk about today, even as we're talking about the church, could probably easily slide in and also fill in for different aspects of your life, different goals that you have set. And I also want to say, even as I hear those broad categories, in fact, they're broad categories, I think they're too broad. Exercise more, lose weight, get organized, learn new skills and hobbies are all too non-specific. If those are your goals, hopefully by the end of today, we'll kind of help you be able to be a little more specific in your goal setting. And in the same way, hope the church can become a little more specific in how we are the church. A simple church defined is a straightforward and strategic process that moves people through stages of spiritual growth. And maybe in some ways we know as a church, when we're talking about the goal as a church and being a simple church, is we have a plan where we know where we're leading people from where they are now to where we want them to be. We might call that from here. Here is kind of where you are now. If you were to go into a mall, or if you were to pull into a travel center, they always have the dot that says you are here. This is where you are right now on the map, but then the destination where you want to go to. And want to, as a simple church, we want to help people get from wherever they are to a preferred destination. The preferred destination, in my mind, is to be more like Jesus, to become a deeply committed follower of Jesus Christ. And then you can begin to work out the specifics. I don't want to rush too far ahead of myself, but we begin to work out the specifics of what it looks like, what a deeply committed follower of Jesus looks like, what a disciple looks like. Well, as I was thinking about New Year's and resolutions and all of that kind of stuff and simple church, I thought about a documentary that came out in 2003. I think it's gotten more and more pushback over the last almost 20 years. Can you believe it's been 20 years since the early 2000s, 2003? We're in 2022 now. But it's a documentary called Supersize Me. And what we've seen is, I did a sermon series one time on decades. And I started in the 70s and went to the 80s and the 90s and then the 2000s. And what you've seen in our cultures, we've continually wanted more and more and more and more stuff. And Supersize Me was about how we wanted more and more food. We wanted more and more, specifically from our fast food restaurants. We wanted bigger hamburgers. We wanted bigger drinks. We wanted bigger fries. And we used to go into McDonald's and people would say, do you want to supersize that? I think now they just ask you if you want a small, a medium, or a large. And sometimes I say, well, how big is the large exactly? And you have this 60-ounce cup of cola that they'll give you. And they're having to bring it out to your car because they can't fit it through the window. And so there was this documentary. I want to remind you of what that was all about. And then we'll kind of get a little bit deeper into what we're talking about today. If you watch that documentary, some of the takeaways that you would gain from that is that, first of all, you need to say no to fast food as often as possible. And in fact, I know that it's possible to say no. I did not eat any fast food other than Subway for almost a decade. And so it's very possible to bypass all of those places and to never eat there. I do think sometimes just in the last few years, I've probably made up for all of those 10 years of missing fast food and have eaten at some of them In fact, Maria thought it was funny when she and I first got married. I didn't know how to order at a drive-through window. I was like, so what do? You just drive up here and tell them, like, the concept of ordering through and not being able to see the person you're talking to was kind of odd to me. Perhaps I'm just a little bit odd, but Supersize Me, the conclusion, say no to fast food. The second thing we learned from that documentary is that we, the consumers, are to blame. We're the ones who are asking for this kind of stuff. We're the ones that are going for this kind of stuff. In fact, many of the things that we complain about culturally, we also do. It's almost like we wish like we say, used to hear it a lot, people would say, why are stores open on Sunday? When I was a kid, stores weren't open on Sunday, and then we're going to look at our clock and we're going to go, you know what, I got enough time to run to Walmart today. It's the only time I'm going to go to Walmart today. You're the reason the Walmart is open on Sunday. I'm the reason Walmart's open on Sunday. We, the consumers, are to blame. We're the ones who wanted a bigger burger. We wanted more French fries. We wanted that 60-ounce cola that they can't even fit through the window. They have to like bring it around outside, and they're carrying it with two hands. Like, we wanted all that stuff. We are to blame. We've developed taste buds for fat dipped in grease. I was reading about the ingredients of the grease of the McDonald's French fries. Did you know that before they were required to use vegetable oil, it sounded like they were basically using the something similar, or maybe it was exactly the grease from the hamburgers to fry their fries in. And now in the United States, the McDonald's grease has like 13 ingredients in it because we're so used to that nasty fried hamburger flavor that they tried to reproduce that for us. And like England, for example, I read that they have 3 ingredients in their French fry grease. We have 12 or 13 ingredients in our French fry grease because they're not accustomed to that. And so we have asked for this. We've wanted it. Fast food establishments are simply capitalizing on our poor choices. Our taste and our busy lives, we say we're too busy to eat anything else, have expanded the menus and also expanded our waistlines. We know that Americans have gotten fatter and fatter. And we keep getting more and more unhealthy, right? Everybody agree with that premise? And we've done the same thing in the church. I did a series on decades, maybe a decade ago, and then I looked at the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, and what you see is one of the common themes is always this constant push to be bigger and to have more. We want to have bigger houses so that we can put more stuff in our houses, or we say we needed the bigger house because we had so much stuff, and then we get the bigger house and we fill it with stuff, and then after we fill our house with stuff, we have to go out and buy a storage locker if we don't get a bigger house because we need to fill that with some more stuff, and our cars have gotten bigger, our food has gotten bigger. Churches oftentimes, they get busier because we think busy is better, and so all of this is kind of a spiritual supersize me. We don't even talk about supersize anymore, but it's just we want to have that large drink, those large fries. We want everybody in the church to have it their way. We're always trying to make sure that everybody's happy. Somebody wants a special event in a particular way, we expand the menu that we offer at the church. And people assume that if we can squeeze the more in, the better we're doing. I've even heard people say before, we're really busy. We must be doing something good. And like, well, I don't really know. I don't know if we're really making disciples just because we're busy. If it's the same 5 people coming to 5 different events, like that's great. And we hope that they're being formed into disciples, but are they forming disciples? The brochure gets bigger. The week gets busier. The calendar gets busier. The schedule is busier. And the process gets expanded and it gets cluttered. And oftentimes we just find ourselves in the church getting more and more unhealthy. Over the last 60 years, with increasing busyness in the church, no matter your denomination, Baptist or Methodist or Presbyterian or Episcopalian or whatever label you want to place underneath that heading, all of those churches have been shrinking for 60 years continuously. Have gotten smaller and smaller. Less people are being reached. More people are outside of the church. More people are finding different paths to faith and their religiosity. And all the while, churches oftentimes have gotten busier and more programmed and offer more special events. And we think that's better. The conclusion we probably should reach is that fast food spirituality hasn't helped us. In fact, it's made us more unhealthy, with one exception. There's been one exception to these continual decline, and that's new faith communities. new church starts. And oftentimes it's not even a new church start. Now they talk about fresh expressions or a new faith expression. It's a new community that meets in maybe what's not considered a traditional way. And sometimes even the new church starts do look more traditional, like the way that we do church. But the reason that they're successful is they're simple. They lack a lot of the baggage. And they also are bringing people with them on a destination. If you ever go to like a new church start, it's pretty clear where that church is headed. They talk about it all the time. From the beginning, you sit in your seat, to the time you leave the door, the people in the new church starts are casting the vision like, this is who we are, this is what we're doing, this is what we do, and this is where we're headed. They're always casting that vision for you. They're always taking you with you on that destination, and they also have a lot less baggage to go along with it. One of the reasons I've never started those, and I'm almost like, I'm kind of equally as hard-headed as perhaps those that are in the congregation, in the sense that I believe the existing congregations should be, not that it's a competition, but should be able to do more than a church with just a few people, a church that has no money, a church that has no meeting space. Why do we struggle in our mainline churches when we have so much meeting space, so much money, and we oftentimes have so many more people? The Kentucky Annual Conference found out that for Kentucky, something called a parachute church didn't work very well in Kentucky, but we saw it working in other places. But what that is it's basically just one person who's out there like hitting the streets, banging their head against doors all the time and collecting people. What we found that actually works better is kind of like sister or brother churches where you send out 10 or 20 or 30 maybe people and grow a congregation. But my point in all of this is if it's one person or it's 30 people, that's still less often than what we have. And yet they're able to do so much more with so much less. And oftentimes it's because we have a list of excuses. I want you to think about maybe your own excuses, the ones you make, maybe the ones that you hear. I didn't even spend a whole lot of time, and I got 4 or 5 pretty quickly. The first is that we always do it this way, and that's why we always do it. It lacks strategy. It lacks intentionality. I mean, it's fine if what you always do is the way you always do it. I want you to think about that in your own life and say, like, well, I've gained 30 pounds this past year. Well, I'm just eating the way that I always do, like what's the difference? It's obviously not working. You might need to consider changing something up. There's a service that happens somewhat regularly, and I remember asking the question when the people were wanting to have it, is this something that the community wants? Because oftentimes we're doing things that are driven by people wanting something, and if like 10 people show up, I think the answer, if it's a community-wide service and 10 people show up to the community-wide service, I think we're either not doing something the community is interested in, we're not doing it the way that they want, there's something about it, or perhaps they're just not interested. So why do we keep doing it? And the answer is, this is what we always do. But think about that, and that's easy if it's a ministry that's not our own. That's easy because we can even talk about that. I can remember being a part of a ministry, and it's easy coming into a church and looking at things and saying, that doesn't work, we shouldn't do it. But I've also been the person who created the ministries. And it gets a lot harder on the other side of being the one who created it, being the one who's involved in it. You blood, sweat, and tear over it, and then having to go back and look at it and say, it's just not working. It's not working the way that I intended it to work. It's not working the way that I designed it. It was good 3 years ago, but it's not good now. And I need to take a look at why that is, or I need to think about not doing it at all. We need to take a look at all the ministries that we have in our church, and or just maybe even the way that we're doing, and say, why aren't people more involved? Or maybe the goal is not people involvement. Maybe it's deep discipleship growth, and are we doing that? Are we experiencing that? Another one I hear a lot is we're traditional, which is just as bad to me as saying we're contemporary. We're traditional, we're contemporary. The problem with that is the definition of both of those words is always changing. When I first started pastoring and someone said they were traditional, I thought that they meant they sang Charles Wesley hymns from the 1700s. I found out what they meant traditional is that they sang Fanny Crosby songs from the 1920s and 30s. That was their definition. We had 2 different definitions of traditional. And guess what? If I were to walk into a church in like the 1500s talking about let's let's get that pipe organ rolling and sing us some Charles Wesley, they're going to be like, get out of here, buddy. You're a heathen with that pipe organ. That's only stuff for, the church began bringing musical instruments in the 10th, between the 10th and the 12th century. So before that, it was all like singing a cappella and probably a whole lot more like chanting. That was a big thing probably 20, 30 years ago, the monk chanting you could buy. That had an album out called Chant, and you could buy the monks chanting. And so we got to be careful of those terms that we're using. And then how about this? Instead of being a contemporary church or a traditional church, what if we strive to be a biblical church? Or even better than a biblical church is a Christ-like church. What if that was our goal? As we said, everything that we do in our worship service and our Bible studies is helping us to develop and grow and to be more like Christ. Christ is our goal, not some kind of like changing and shifting definition. Traditional or conservative, or traditional or contemporary. Get myself in trouble now. The next, oftentimes excuse I hear is we don't have enough people. And again, I want to remind you of how nimble and how easy and how well they do ministry in the new churches with less people and less resources. And so not having enough people is an excuse. And how about, again, you're discipling the people you have, and then as you're being discipled, you are going to learn pretty quickly that Jesus said that we are called to be fishers of people. You know what that means? You're going out and you're casting a net. You're fishing and bringing in new people. And even if you don't bring them in the door, you're still called to be out making disciples in your everyday life. Maybe you're inviting them over to your house. Maybe that's more of kind of where we've gained and where we've arrived culturally, is we are inviting people into our homes and we're having small group meetings in our homes, or it's just relationships. That's what you see when you read the Bible. I mean, they got together, it says, and they worshiped and they prayed and they did all that together, but they were just getting together in their homes with the people that they did life with. It was their friends and their family, and they discipled them that way. They didn't even need all the structure and the bureaucracy that we have in churches today. The last one, oftentimes, it gets us in the most trouble, and preachers are the most guilty of it. I heard another pastor say that he said you wouldn't go into ministry if you weren't a people pleaser. We're trying to make everybody happy. If we could just make everybody happy, we'll be okay, right? That's kind of the goal. Oftentimes, it's the church. We got to make everybody happy. It gets us in trouble. You know, I think Jesus gives us an answer all of this, what we're talking about, whether it's in your personal goals that you're trying to develop, if you're trying to work out more or lose weight or read more or get organized, if those are your personal goals, or if for the church goals, Jesus gives us a lot of the answers to these things that we're talking about today. And he does it in John chapter 5, verses 5 through 9. And if you watch the Chosen series, they've done a good job of illustrating this particular story in John 5, verses 5 through 9. You're going to have to flip there. I don't have it ready to stream. John 5, 5 through 9. It says a certain man had been sick for 38 years. Can you imagine being sick for 38 years? I mean, my first thought is how ridiculous that is to actually be sick for 38 years and not do anything about it. And then Maria reminds me that I've had like a stopped up nose, like head thing for 3 years, and I've done nothing about it. But I guess I don't really know what to do about it. And she's like, well, go to a doctor. Like, she knows has all these good ideas all the time. But 38 years this man has been sick. When Jesus saw him lying there, knowing that he had already been there a long time, he said, and this is what we got to pay attention to, do you want to get well? If you got this list, if it's New Year's resolutions or these goals that you've wanted to form, if you're wanting to learn a new language or something that you wanted to do, you've always wanted to do your entire life, the question is, do you really want to do it? Do you really want to get well? The question for the church is, do we really want to be made well? Are we really willing to do what it takes to be made well? Do we really want to do it, or we just talk about it? And I think the answer is, a lot of times, I know both in my personal life and in the church life, in the organizational life of the churches, all the ones, not just picking on one, but all the ones, is the answer is, I just would rather talk about it. I like to talk about it, I like to complain about it, but I don't really want to do anything about it. Do you want to get made well? And you're right there. If that's your attitude, if that's your mentality, if maybe you just had this realization in your own life that you're right, I've been talking about it for a long time. Do you find yourself saying things like, I used to do this, I used to do that, And there's sometimes some really good reasons you used to do it and you don't anymore, right? There's good reasons for that. But sometimes you're saying, I used to do this and I used to do that, and you are the one who's in control of doing it again if you really want to do it. If you really want to be made well. People used to do this in the church. They used to do that in the church. We used to have this ministry. We used to have that ministry. People used to come to this more. Do you really want to get well? And the sick man answered, like a lot of us do. I know, like I answered, Sir, I don't have anyone who can put me in the water. This is where I would expect Jesus to say, you're not answering my question. I didn't ask you if you have somebody to put you in the water. I asked you, do you want to get well? But yet we oftentimes respond with an excuse rather than respond with an affirmative to the question that we're being asked. Sir, I don't have anyone to put me in the water and stir it up. And when I'm trying to get to it, someone else has gotten ahead of me. And Jesus said to him, get up, pick up your mat and walk. Immediately the man was well, and he picked up his mat and he walked. And then it adds, now that was on the Sabbath day. So what does Jesus do for this man? And even in the midst of his excuses, you're going to notice that Jesus gives him both some clarity and some focus. And the man was lacking the motivation. And here we're going to talk about clarity and motivation and focus. This is what we need to help move us forward. If it's your personal goals or in the church, it all applies. Clarity, motivation, and focus. Jesus certainly gives him the clarity, and he certainly gives him the focus. I don't know if he gives the man the motivation, but he's very simple with what he tells the man to do. Pick up your mat and walk. You want to be made well? Pick up your mat and walk. And immediately the man is well, and he picks up his mat and he walks. I read a book about 10 years ago called Switch, How to Change Things When Change is Hard, and it uses the language through the book, and it's a leadership book. It's not a religious church book. I believe the authors might be Christian, but they're not writing about the church. But they say that you have to direct the rider, you have to motivate the elephant, and shape the path. I've never forgotten those three terms. Direct the rider, motivate the elephant, and shape the path if you want to help lead change, even when change is hard. And so what you have to do is what Jesus does for that man. You have to give some clarity. You need to get clarity around your own goals, around your own values. If it's a personal goal that you're trying to achieve, you need to have it. You need to make it clear. I think just the number 2 goal that most people have is lose weight. I think saying lose weight's too general, too broad of a goal. You need to be specific. How much do you want to lose? It might be, if you're like me, there's just so much that you need to lose that you can't do it all at once. And so you might say my long-term goal is I want to lose 60 pounds, but I'm going to start with 15 because I'm going to make it manageable and reasonable and something that I can do. But it needs to be clear. The same thing is true for the church setting goals. The church needs to set a direction and kind of know where they're headed, and they also need a process to help lead them in that direction. They need to direct the rider. The leadership first needs to have a clear definition of the church, and then the leadership needs to help lead the congregation in that direction, and then be committed to living it out. If you go to a travel center and you're on your way somewhere, if you stop off in the travel center, there's always a map in there. It always has a dot on the map that says, you are here. And of course, now I call it a blessing most of the time. We have these great phones that have all these GPS devices on it. And you can just say, like, this is where I am. You can even say, this is my current location. And then you can type in where you want to go to your destination. And then it'll give you turn-by-turn directions to get to that next destination. You also get to see the overview. But what you're wanting to do in the church and what you're wanting to do in your personal life as well is you want to try to define where your here is, and then you have to look to see how you're going to get there. You need steps to get there, but you need to know where your there is. If I just put in there's not even a button or anything to type in, like just take me where I want to go. I mean, if you want to do that, just go drive around and wherever you go, you go. But if you're actually headed to a destination, you need to know that destination. You need to be clear about it. In the church, the leadership needs to be clear about the direction of the church so that everybody else who's attending can also be clear about that direction. And you have to be willing to then go in that direction. You got to have some clarity. So let me give this example, kind of in my real life, but kind of not real life. And I'll tell you why. It's because I didn't make resolutions and I don't have the motivation. So I'm a hypocrite preaching this morning, I guess. But I was having a conversation with a friend just last week. And she was telling me about wanting to lose weight, and she told me how she was going to go about doing it. And I said, I would love to lose 30 pounds. And she said, how are you going to do it? And I said, I don't have a plan. And she said, that's probably your problem. I said, you're right, it is. And so today I've kind of developed an idea. If I wanted to lose 30 pounds and I had the motivation to do so, I would say I'm going to eat 1,500 calories and I'm going to run 3 miles a day until I lose that weight. And it might be a good idea to be even a little more specific and say, I'm going to analyze what I'm doing in 30 days. And if in 30 days I haven't seen any progress, I'm going to need to change something. What do I need to change? I'm going to change the metric that I'm using. Maybe 1,500 is too much, although I don't want to give dietary advice here today, but perhaps you don't want to go a whole lot lower than that. I know a lot of people do the 1,200 calorie diets, but there might be something I need to change. Maybe I wasn't really eating 1,500 calories. That's usually what I find is I said that this was how I was going to do it, and then I did it in a different way. And really the point of my message today and helping you individually and as the church is not necessarily that you always get to where you're headed, but you're got a destination and you're trying to get there, and you usually do end up a little closer. A couple years ago, I set out to speak Italian. I'm not fluent in Italian, but I could make you think that I speak a little Italian, right? Just enough to fool you. And so I didn't quite I didn't accomplish the goal fully, but I do speak a little bit, right? That's how that works. Clarity. You got to have clarity for the church. A couple of Januaries ago, we got around and we developed missions and purpose. You got a mission and purpose here on your back wall already. And no matter where you go, if it's a church, that mission and purpose has something to do with loving God. It has something to do with loving people. And it has something to do with making disciples. And so the general, broad, clear view of the church is the church knows that they need to love God, they need to love people, and they need to make disciples. If you're a church, you need to be doing those three things. And I would think regardless of how you write the mission or the vision up, those three things need to be accomplished. Well, how do you do that? If you want to kind of have a little bit of general, we're going to love God through worship, we're going to love people through service, and we're going to make disciples through small groups or discipleship groups. And so we get a little clarity around what we're doing and how we're doing it. But now we got to have the motivation. And this is where I find that we probably fail the most individually in our personal lives when we set these New Year's resolutions and the goals we have for our life, as well as in the church. We fail to have the motivation. The motivation is a process that causes people to move into a greater area of commitment, and it helps to move them individually and as a church from that point of where they are now here to where they want to go there. And to move people, you got to motivate them. This is motivate the elephant. Remember, we directed the rider. We came up with the destination. We said, that's where you want to go. And you kind of got a general path. You're looking at the iPhone. You got the GPS. You can see the blue line, like you're going to get from here to there. That's where you're headed. And so now you got to be motivated to get there. And you got to motivate the elephant. This is the emotional appeal. If you can win the heart, you can win the mind. And as you're motivating the elephant, the second part of motivation is shaping the path. You got to have those steps from here to there. Let me give you an example of the kind of motivation, and this is where I'm lacking right now. You can Google search about obesity and being overweight, and you can find out it's the 5th leading risk of global deaths. That's pretty high. That sounds like bad news, right? At least 2.8 million people or adults die each year as a result from being overweight or obese. Well, again, it's a lot of people, but it's not enough to motivate me because there's like 12 billion people on the planet, so I'm probably not going to be one of those 2.8 anytime soon, right? It's not enough to motivate. But if I go to a doctor and the doctor says, William, if you don't lose weight, you're at really high risk for a heart attack, like imminently, like really soon. It kind of changes things. Or if you go ahead and have that heart attack, it changes things. It gives you this motivation. I've realized year after year after year, church after church after church, I've been using a statistic. 80% of the people in any given community in the United States are unchurched. I don't think that's really ever motivated anybody to change the way that they live their life. But if their child isn't going to church, if their child isn't following Jesus, their grandchildren aren't going to church, their grandchildren aren't following Jesus, they become a little bit more motivated. I had a guy on my staff a few years ago, and he, when we would have our meetings, we would talk about his children for a long period of time, and I started realizing his children were representations of all of this 80%. But for him, it was personal because he could identify this child and that child and that child. I think he had 4 daughters, and so he could identify all these children and kind of different engagements. One of them actually served in the church with us, so one was highly involved in the church. One attended sometimes, one never attended, so they were all kind of on the spectrum. And he could identify it was personal for him. He was motivated to reach lost people for Jesus Christ because he knew exactly what it looked like in his own family. A vague number doesn't necessarily change anything about us. We got to be specific. We got to motivate the elephant, and then we got to begin to shape the path. I said you want to love God in the church, you're going to love people, and you're going to make disciples. Specifically, how are we going to do that? Well, we can love God through worship. I said that broadly. But then we need to ask ourselves, how do we form disciples through worship? How are we forming disciples through this time right now? Like, how specifically are we doing it? How are the songs that we sing, the prayers that we pray, the creeds that we recite together, the Lord's Prayer, the sermon? How is everything that we're doing from beginning to end forming disciples? Maybe we could explain the Apostles' Creed. You can explain it in 20 to 30 seconds and say, well, the Apostles' Creed is an ancient creed of the church that we say it every week together because it reminds us as well as teaches us that the basics of the foundations of the Christian faith, this is what we believe that all the people in our church should believe. And so we would describe it that way, maybe give a little bit, there are different ways to describe it, but be specific in how you're forming. And the same is true with small groups. You're going to have small groups. You're going to help us to form disciples. How are we doing that? And what does it look like to have a formed disciple? What does it look like intentionally? We're going to have service opportunities, but we're going to be specific. We're probably going to narrow it down to just one or two and not be overwhelmed by a whole bunch, but we're going to make sure those one or two have a high impact. We're going to try to be clear on all of that. I talked about what it means to form a disciple. This is just one visual. Again, it's not as specific as it could be. And I don't know if anything with mission and vision is ever as specific as you want it to be. It's okay if you can't read that, but the idea of this, and I'm way over my time, is that you're moving people along in the religious journey. A lot of people in our community, that 80%, are way off to the left of this arrow. That's all you need to see if you can't read the writing. Way off to the left of the arrow are all these other people that aren't connected to the church. They're non-religious oftentimes. They're nominally religious, which means they're kind of sitting on the fence. They don't really care. They don't feel like faith impacts them in any kind of way. And we believe that prevenient grace is at work in the lives of all people all the time. It's God's drawing grace. Even if somebody feels like they're far from God, alienated from the church, we believe God loves them and is drawing them unto himself. Prevenient grace. And then sometimes people make this decision. This is probably where I think most people who attend church, not everybody who attends church, but most have made this decision that I'm going to follow Jesus. Whether they prayed a prayer, whether it was at their home, it was at the dinner table, they did it at the altar. Somewhere along the line they said, I'm going to follow Jesus. And I think where we've made a mistake oftentimes in the church is we've let people just stay in that part of their journey. We've said, it's okay, you're following Jesus, that's all we're asking. And oftentimes they never move on to the greater parts of the church, the deeper aspects of the church, like being active in community life. And my definition of community life is they are worshiping, they're in small groups, and they're serving. And so they're involved in the church. A lot of times we never make it into that area of the church, and it really would be the equivalent of buying a great new house and then just putting your bed and refrigerator all in the foyer and never going and exploring the rest of the house. But a lot of times we come into the church and we experience this great thing called salvation, this life transformation work of Jesus Christ in our life, but we never actually extend or explore the rest of our faith. We never actually get involved in our faith. And then probably more people are involved in community life than are not, but we have a hard time getting people to move over into servant leadership and then to become deeply committed followers of Jesus Christ. Oftentimes you can actually, everything that I've said here, you can track based off of your ministry events. The way that I used to track this is I had people, I tracked it by saying worship, I had Bible study called Foundations, and then I had a group called Life Groups, and then there were a leadership team. And the way that I tracked it was I wanted to see I tracked the individual person as well as the statistic as the percentage, how many people. Worship was kind of the big catch category. And then I said, how many people in worship are involved in small group, are involved in my Bible study? And then how many people are involved in my life groups, which I saw was going a little bit deeper? And then how many of those people ended up on the leadership team? And my goal was to continually increase the number of people that we were bringing into the leadership team.
and seeing people kind of grow in service. Or we also, part of leadership was having a service component. And so we said, how many people we have that are going out? And we had a ministry that we worked in, a homeless ministry where we fed people, and it was also like a worship service that we were doing out in the community. So I tracked everything that I've said to you here. I was able to numerically track it and see if people were growing or not. I have a whole commercial I'm not going to read for time's sake. But we talked about clarity, we had motivation, and then we got to have focus. When we're personal goals or church goals, we have to limit and oftentimes eliminate things and really be sure what we're focusing on. Like if your goal was losing weight, it's probably good if you limit, and I would even suggest, because I know it's possible, to just eliminate the fast food. Eliminate the fried food. I'm not even going to look up at some of you. Don't. Focus is the commitment to abandon everything that falls outside of our ministry process. Focus is the ability to limit or completely eliminate everything that falls outside of the goals that you set for yourself. Whatever that goal is, whatever you're trying to achieve, focus. We got it in the church. It looks like for us doing away with our idols. In the church, it looks like getting rid of everything that doesn't help us love God. It doesn't help us love people. It doesn't help us make disciples. We should get rid of it. If it's not biblical and it's a barrier, it's gone. There's a fun little part of a story that I've been missing for a long time. Like in the back of my mind, I even asked on Facebook, like, does anyone seen, this? It was very general, like somebody destroyed an idol, and finally I got the answer. And my problem was I wasn't reading far enough. A lot of times that's our problem. We don't read far enough in the text to get what we're trying to find. We don't read far enough to get the experience, the life change that we need to read. It was in Exodus 32, verse 20. It's all a part of the story of Moses going up onto the mountain. And Moses goes up there and he's gone and he's away for a while. The people are left behind. They don't have clarity, but they do have motivation to worship, but they don't have the focus. They don't care what they worship. They don't care who it is or what it is. And so Moses is away, and they begin to ask Aaron, Moses' brother, give us something to worship. And so Aaron forms them a golden calf to worship, and they go, okay, that's good enough. We'll worship that. Moses comes down. He's angry, and he shatters the Ten Commandments everywhere, and he's mad. And this was the part that I couldn't find this past week when I was looking for it. Moses then melts down the idol, and he administers it into their drinking water. I'm not suggesting we melt anything down and put it in our drinking water this week. But what I am suggesting is that we should melt down our idols. We should melt down our roadblocks. Anything that's getting between us and what we say that we want to do, we need to get rid of it. If it's not biblical and it's a barrier, it's gone. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, do we really want to be made well? Do we really want to be made well? And then we need to be clear. If we really want to be made well, if that's an affirmative answer, if yes, we want to be made well as a church, yes, if we want to be made well as an individual, if we want to be more healthy, exercise more, lose weight, read a book, learn a language, if we want to be made well, whatever it is you want to do, you need some clarity. You got to direct the rider. You need some motivation. You got to motivate the elephant, and you need to shape the path, and you need to get focus. Keep your eyes on the big picture and limit or eliminate everything else. Do you want to be made well? Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, we thank you for gathering us here today. We thank you for your presence among us. We thank you again for a new year, for just a point in the calendar where we can take a look at where we've been and then look to the future of where we want to go. God, we know that you have given to us and are willing to give us even more and more of your wisdom, more and more of your guidance through your Holy Spirit. If only we would seek it, if only we would ask for it, if only we would search for it, God, it's available to us. And you give us more than we need every single day. You strengthen us to face adversity. And you're able to give to us a peace in the midst of life's storms and hard times. And so, God, as we were beginning this new year together as a church on the second day of the year, we look to you. And we ask you, God, where do you want to take us? What do you want to do with us in 2022? Where do you want to take us as individuals? Where do you want to take us as the church? God, lead, guide, and direct our ways. Give us the clarity that we need and the motivation to do it. And then help us to hunker down and focus on your calling. God, we thank you. And we love you. And on this beginning of the new year, we give all of ourselves to you. In Jesus' holy and precious name, amen.